early on in our demonstration project, we decided to field a survey with primary care providers just to get a general sense of how shared decision-making was viewed across the organization more generally. And as you can see from the results, only a small percentage of physicians reported being uncomfortable with shared decision-making or concerned with medico-legal liability. Time, as we had already heard anecdotally and from conversations, was reported to be the most common barrier. And as you can see from the graph here, nearly 70% reported time as their biggest barrier. However, while time was always often talked about, we wanted to know if there was really more to the resistance to shared decision-making that we were encountering. And was it really just about time, or was there something more behind it? So recently, this past June, we conducted focus groups with both physicians and clinic staff separately to try and obtain an idea of what might be what we considered the real barriers to shared decision-making. And so here's what we learned. No surprise, as many have already talked about in the presentations yesterday, many physicians felt that they were already doing shared decision-making. As one participant explains, I don't think we always think in our mind we're sharing the decision, but I think we usually are. It's like, well, this cough, you know we're considering X and Y and Z and these two medications. And how bad is your cough? Are you sleeping well? Okay, what do you think about trying this one? I think patients expect it, this participant said. I don't know if it always comes out as that label of shared decision-making, but it's just how most of us talk to patients. However, while our physicians say and believe that they're already doing shared decision-making, we actually have evidence from our demonstration project that reveals otherwise. And what we found is that there is a clear disconnect between physicians' self-perceptions of shared decision-making and their actual practice. Through our focus groups, we discovered that physicians selectively engage in shared decision-making, and their views of whether a patient might benefit from shared decision-making, and a decision aid in particular, depended on a doctor's assessment of the patient's ability to comprehend the info or the perceived efficacy of a particular treatment. And in this passage, one focus group participant says, I don't think you should give a patient a choice of treatment if you're not willing to accept that choice, because otherwise, what are you supposed to say? Like, well, I don't believe in the material I just gave you. I mean, that's what you're saying, and I think that's confusing and unfair to the patient. And from this, there's a rationale for not giving out a decision aid if they don't believe in the particular option at hand. And so, separately, we conducted focus groups with clinic staff. And while the clinic staff agreed that time, of course, was an issue, and also observed what I've described here about the physicians, they felt that what truly impacted the uptake of shared decision-making in the organization was the prevailing model of patient care and operation. In particular, our staff focus groups, and these are medical assistants and nurses, felt that at PAMF, especially among the more seasoned physicians, that the traditional model of care was far more prevalent. And how did they define how they define traditional? You'd go to the doctor, and the doctor tells you what to do, and you just take what they tell you, and you go home and do what they said and follow their directions, versus having any input at all. And shared decision-making is not viewed as traditional. So then the question becomes, what can we do to successfully make inroads about shared decision-making into a culture that seems locked into a traditional model of care? And we asked ourselves, we asked our staff focus group participants this very question: what could be done to make shared decision-making successful at PAMF? And this is what they said. And I also need to add that we conducted these focus groups just recently, a year and a half after we had been conducting the demonstration projects as well. So staff said that in order for shared decision-making to succeed at PAMF, that it needed to be doctor-driven, that the concept and practice of shared decision-making needed to be both embraced and diffused to both staff and patients by the physician. And in this quote, one of the medical assistants, who also happens to be the identified champion at this particular department, said the physician has to totally embrace it and say, welcome to my practice. I totally believe in shared decision making. This is what it means to me. Your voice, you're important. That this is what should be happening. And that way it begins to change this, what I call traditional. This is what the medical assistant in those groups said needs to be done to make it successful, but we know is it's not happening yet. And so, having just reviewed, just briefly, what we've learned from both physicians and staff from the survey and also the focus group, it would be interesting to share with you what a patient's perspective and a patient's particular experience at PAMF with shared decision-making has been. And so in this next slide, I will share one patient's experience with shared decision-making. So several months ago, a patient contacted our Partners in Medical Decision-Making hotline. We have a dedicated telephone number where patients can contact us about anything related to the program. The telephone number is listed on our DVD programs, through our navigator, on our brochures. Everywhere we have publicity materials. And the patient had seen her physician for an annual physical exam, and the doctor had provided the colon cancer screening DVD to the patient. The patient watched the DVD, read the booklet, reviewed her screening options, and then contacted the doctor through the online patient messaging portal and sent a message stating that she had decided on the stool test option and could the doctor please place the order. The doctor refused. The doctor wrote back to her and said, we only believe in two options, colonoscopy or flexible sigmoidoscopy. Which do you want? The patient was very, very confused. The doctor had given her this program. She had watched the DVD. She'd reviewed all the options outlined. She made a clear and informed and reasonable decision that reflected her preferences, only to be told that the option that she decided upon was not available to her. So what did she do? She called us. She wanted an explanation. And so when she contacted us, I explained to her that indeed the stool test option that she wanted was an option available at PAMF and that other patients had used it. And we discussed the program, and even armed with this information, and in fact the option that she desired was in fact available at PAMF, and that she still wanted to have the stool test when she talked to me, she was unwilling to go back to her doctor and assert her preferences. So I'd like to stop here and ask you, the audience, to reflect upon the various lenses that we've learned about over the past day and discussed, and ask, what's going on here? What do you think is happening? So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and tell you about a study that we conducted that might shed a little more light on how and why the patient in this case study I presented perhaps reacted the way she did. So in a separate study, we conducted focus groups with PAMF patients and asked them about their experiences around communicating with doctors about medical decisions. And we want to note that the patients that participated in this focus group that we did were quite privileged. They were predominantly Caucasian, living in Silicon Valley. The majority of the participants held graduate degrees, and nearly all had an annual household income of over $100,000 or more. So at all ends, a really privileged group. However, what we learned from them was that despite their seeming privilege and education, when it came to communicating with their doctors, they did not often assert their preferences. What we learned from our focus group participants was that while being involved in medical decision-making was quite desired, they overwhelmingly felt that not challenging their physician helped to protect them. They described a sense of needing to adopt the role of a good patient, not questioning a physician's advice or recommendation because it could foster resentment. In this excerpt, one participant articulates a little more clearly exactly what they are trying to protect themselves from. He says, if I were to do that, assert my preferences, I would think, is the guy going to be pissed at me for not doing what he wanted? Is he going to come out in some other way that's going to lower the quality of my treatment? Will he do what I want but resent it and therefore not quite be as good or in some way detrimental to the quality of my care? And what this patient is articulating is that what is preventing him from asserting his preferences is a potential fear that the physician might be offended or will punish him in some way, such that it will lead to a lower quality of care now or in the future. Being deferential to protect self-interest is a very important point. Our focus group participants also described approaching their medical encounters and communication with their physicians in a way that would serve to protect their self-interests, frequently describing adopting deferential positions to avoid displeasing or disappointing their physician by asking too many questions or by disagreeing with a recommendation. In this next excerpt, one respondent, a woman, describes the second thought she had regarding a decision that she had made that was counter to her doctor's recommendation. And to ensure that her long-term interests weren't harmed, she said, I ended up apologizing, saying, I hope I didn't upset you by saying I don't want surgery. It isn't that I don't trust you or like you, I just need time. But I was backpedaling and saying, I hope you're not mad at me. So what we've just provided briefly are two examples from a patient population that might otherwise be construed as more privileged and thus more likely to assert their preferences, but still they don't. And so I shall leave you with that for further thought and conversation.